My name is Donna, and this is the Vote Voiced podcast. Vote Voiced is here to talk about today critical thinking. Why is critical thinking important? It's important because when we need to vote, we need to have our critical thinking caps on. Now, Vote Voice, you can follow us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can visit us at www.votevoice.com. We are on several podcasts. We're on Anchor. We're on Breaker, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and Spotify. I want to thank Anchor for everything that they've done for me. I've been very successful as a podcaster using Anchor. Now let's get into why we need to know how to think critically, and especially as voters, okay? Because you may wonder about what heights you could rise to in your personal and professional life if you put all of your thinking into focus. The same thing applies for voting. So much of our brain capacity is unused and lying dormant. And what if you knew the secret of thinking so that your life would improve tenfold and help you to achieve all the goals you have in life? And what if you could take everything you learn about critical thinking and apply it when you're listening to politicians, when you're deciding who it is you're going to vote for and what propositions you're going to vote yes or no on? Critical thinking is developed over time and is like learning any sport or art. You can't just get up one morning and say, I think I'm going to become a critical thinker today. And sometimes, we run into a situation where a candidate sends us information and we've never heard of this person before. And if this is someone's first time running, we need to make sure that as we're listening to what they're saying, we're thinking critically, not emotionally, but critically, that we're using all of our brain thought to figure out, is what this person saying making sense? And is what this person saying going to apply to my life and the life of my community? The only paths through which a person can develop insightful thinking are by knowing and accepting the truth that there are flaws in your thinking. You must also constantly practice becoming a thinker who can effectively solve problems through logical thinking rather than emotions. Becoming a critical thinker can help you develop strategies where you overcome the obstacles that life presents, and you can overcome being bamboozled by bright lights, firecrackers, good food, okay, at a rally. You're going there to hear what the politician has to say. You're not going there for a party. So we need to make sure that we are focused. Becoming a critical thinker can help you develop strategies, right? And some obstacles you may want to remove from your life. And some of these obstacles, you can do that with critical thinking. You can analyze the influences in your life. You can learn to make your own decisions rather than falling under the decisions or influences of others. You can get your ego under control. because your ego may be keeping you back from advancing at work, from developing better relationships, or even from hearing a different point of view, no matter what political party you're with. You can solve problems better, because if you're too scattered to solve problems, and thinking with emotions usually doesn't solve anything, using critical thinking can help you to get in touch with your emotions and to solve problems through logical thinking. You can stop wasting time. You may be wasting your entire day of productivity by going in many directions at once. You may not actually be enjoying anything you do if you're wasting time, because you know you're going to get behind. You know that you're putting things off, and you become frustrated when you're wasting time. Critical thinking can help teach you how to evaluate your time and spend it wisely. Now, we all have great capacity to think critically and to improve our lives immensely. But most of the time it's dormant. I've said this before. We used to be like cicadas. We're not like cicadas anymore. We are paying attention to everything that's going on in our world, the world that requires us to vote, requires us to let our legislators know that we don't want voter suppression laws, to let our legislators know that we expect them to work for the people, because the people are the ones who sent them to our Washingtons and to our Lansings, and we expect them to take care of the people. That is what we elected them to do, right? So we can make our critical thinking better with practice, just as we would learn a musical instrument or a sport. Non-critical thinking is a habit that we're not even mindful of most of the time. And we sit staring at a mindless program on television, playing mindless video games, or engaging in gossip or other pursuits that don't require critical thinking. If you want to develop the traits of a critical thinker, you must study and research. You must put what you've learned into practice on a daily basis. Now, I love my games, I love my TV binging and things like that, but we also have to remember that we need to engage in voter engagement, voter mobilization, voter registration. We need to engage, even this is a non-political entity voice, but even if you must dive into politics, we need to make sure there's so much we can do right now, okay? Even in the middle of a pandemic, even though we're coming out of it, even in our efforts to, slowly go back to work, which is something that we're doing very slowly. We hope that we're moving back to normal, but it's slow, So it's important to think critically. The importance of critical thinking in your life is crucial to keep you from being scammed, losing out on success, being led astray, and to develop into an individual rather than a person who goes along with the masses. It's a skill that many people lack, and one that's more crucial in today's world, more than ever, because of the constant stream of media ideals that are presented at almost every waking moment of the day. You know that we have issues with information that is not true, misinformation. And everything just ties into everything else. Voter suppression, right? There is a voter suppression law. Let me remind you guys. There is a voter suppression law in the state of Michigan that says that it's Bill 305, okay? Now, this is the bill that makes it a misdemeanor for the Secretary of State and county and local clerks to use their name or likeness on any election-related communications paid for with public money, including educational materials and election inspector recruitment. Now, the issue with this is that the number one tool is disinformation, okay, and sowing distrust in our election process. Now, voters know that when they're getting information from the Secretary of State or their local clerk, they can rely on it, and they know this because of their name and likeness on the document. Now, this goes back to critical thinking, okay? If you are receiving information and you don't know where it's coming from, you can't logically think it out. Okay, it postpones your decision. You have to double check where this information is coming from. It's basically setting you up for a scam. This Bill 305. You can't use your critical thinking. When you hear about these bills, what you see is these voter suppression bills, they don't want you to think critically about voting. One of the most important things you're going to do in your life from the time you're 18 until the time you pass on from this world is vote. And they don't want you to think critically. This is why it's so important that I talk to you about the critical thinking process that helps you solve problems, because you're able to analyze an issue from several viewpoints rather than taking someone's word for a fact or to base your decision on old values and knowledge. Critical thinking skills are necessary to help you become a truly competent and intelligent human being. You need critical thinking. When you hear about Senate Bill 286, okay? It limits voters' use of drop boxes, prohibits prepaid postage on absentee ballot return envelopes, and bars the Secretary of State from sending absentee ballot applications to voters or making the application available on the Secretary of State website. Now, the problem with this is that there are all unnecessary restrictions that discourage voters from voting absentee. Drop boxes need to be available to voters through 8 p.m. on Election Day, which is the deadline for absentee ballots to be received. Prohibiting municipalities from paying for postage on absentee ballots is an undue burden on voters. The weight of the ballot varies by the length of the ballot, which varies across the state. Voters could be easily confused about whether their ballot requires 1 or 2 stamps, and the absentee ballot application should be widely available to all voters because all voters have the constitutional right to vote absentee. Okay? Now, critical thinking helps you to separate from the truth from which is false, or perhaps incomplete, or a truth based on mass thinking. When you think critically, you'll consider the problem thoroughly based on its history and all the elements it contains, You won't base decisions on assumptions, but by the information you gather as you analyze the situation. Here again, they do not want you to think critically, especially when it comes to voting, especially when it comes to saying, I don't want this bill because it is voter suppression. They're hoping you won't critically think about voting. Therefore, they can say and do anything to prevent you from voting. You'll also be able to use the critical thinking process to find new alternatives to problems and situations that come about in your life, rather than look at a situation in an assumptive view. You'll look at the factors that directly cause or influence it and be able to understand it on other levels. Unless you employ critical thinking in your decision making, you're missing out on having the ability to see things in new ways. You'll only be seeing the bare minimum of a situation's complexity and run the risk of accepting statements and ideals at face value rather than gathering knowledge and using the critical thinking process to decide if the ideal is one that you can believe. Critical thinking can help you sort out what are facts and what is either emotional, inaccurate, based on bias, or doesn't present the entire picture. Since it's almost impossible to eliminate emotion from your reaction or attitude toward others or various situations, it is important that you employ critical thinking techniques so that you can make the correct decision, and one that isn't based on emotional reaction. When you think critically as a voter, as an American, just in your everyday life, you'll receive the most accurate view of the reality of a situation. It may not make you 100% objective, but you can come closer to getting the results you want and having success with the situation or issue that comes up on the ballot, that comes up at the polls, that comes up when you're listening to politicians telling you what it is they claim they're going to do. Because if you're thinking critically, then that politician, they have to do more than just kiss babies. They have to really, really prove to you that they're the person for the job. You just can't stand up and say that you're going to vote for an issue or a person and you don't know anything about them. You can't go into your polling place and make a snap decision. You can't. Now, let me tell you what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is disciplined thinking that is clear, rational, open-minded, and informed by evidence. It consists of practical reasoning that encompasses that result from logical thinking. And many experts consider it the path to forming a responsible society rather than one that only thinks about personal survival. Oh, that comes back to putting country first over political jobs. It comes to making a decision for what's good for the people rather than what's good for you because you want to stay in office, so you don't want other people to have laws from our government to make voting easier or to protect us during election time because you're putting yourself before the country. Critical thinking is not processing information such as turning on your car blinker or to turn left or right or counting change for the tollway. Critical thinking is of a higher order thinking that helps a person judge what is right or wrong, choose between political candidates, or come to a decision about global warming, or even deciding to go to the polls. Are you going to vote? Why aren't you going to vote? Apply some critical thinking. Remember, there's a past world where African Americans had to count jelly beans before you could vote. And heck, bubbles on soap, and suffragists went to prison and endured all kinds of torture just to vote, people. And here we are sitting in a world where we can vote easily, and we don't do it. Do we? We don't do it at all. The critical thinking person knows how to gather and process information and use his or her creative thinking to logically support the information into a reliable answer to a complicated or involved question or problem. To involve yourself with critical thinking practice, you must be able to detach yourself from feelings and emotions and to narrow down any questions to the truth as you see it from your research and gathering of information. Research a subject. Research it. Research the person you're going to vote for. Critical thinking, there are 3 types of critical thinking: reasoning, making decisions, and judging and solving problems. Critical thinking plays a part in all these types of thinking, and we think in those terms on a constant basis. Critical thinking isn't about making a decision to surf the web for information about dogs, but when you choose a site and then make a decision on what site says about dogs, you're entered into a critical thinking realm. Now, critical thinking helps you see both sides of the coin or the issue, rather than only concentrating on evidence that supports your way of seeing the issue. Gathering all the information and then basing your decision on what you've learned is the best example of critical thinking. To engage in critical thinking, it's imperative that you do not let emotions or radical thinking interfere with the analytical type of thinking you need to make a decision or solve problems. You can avoid many of life's problems by practicing critical thinking and relying on the wisdom you can get from other evidence. The purpose of critical thinking is not to teach you how to think in a certain way, but to get you to think logically about any problem or circumstance that arises in your daily life. And we need critical thinking, okay? When we go to the polls, we need critical thinking in these upcoming elections. In Taylor, we need to make a real critical choice. In Taylor, Michigan, we have to vote for a mayor. And we need to decide who we're going to vote for. You're going to put in someone new? Or are we going to write in the old mayor who has been indicted on several criminal charges? Now, that's a critical choice. That choice is up to you. And each person has to make a choice. But hey, your choice won't be made, people, if you do not vote. So you need to make sure you're registered to vote. You need to make sure you know where your polls are. You need to make a plan to vote. And you have to really put on your critical thinking cap, because when you go into those polls, you are going to have to decide to either write in a candidate or choose a new candidate. That is what we're facing. And these same questions in different ways, they're out there all over the country. Listen, this is Donna Miller with Vote Voiced. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. I appreciate you. Will you please make a donation to Vote Voiced? Just go to www.votevoiced.com and find that little donate button and make a donation. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're on TikTok. I try to put out as much information as I can. I want you to have a wonderful weekend, and I want you to just remember to vote and listen to our podcast. We're on several different platforms. This is Donna Miller from Vote Voiced, and you have a wonderful day.